Imagine going into the hospital expecting to leave with a new baby, but what you really left with was $30,000 in debt that an identity thief ran up in your name because the thief was working in the hospital's finance department. This might sound like an improbable story, but it actually happened to one of our clients. My name is Tom Christiano, and I'm with Blankingship and Christiano. And with me is Hugo Blankingship, my law partner. Hugo has had the opportunity to argue before the Supreme Court of the United States, which was a big honor. But I believe this case, Hugo, is the most impactful case that our firm has ever had. What do you think?
I would have to agree with that. This was one of the earlier Fair Credit Reporting Act cases we had, and the fact pattern was just really shocking when the client first approached us and explained that she'd gone into the hospital. She did come out with a baby, but she also came out with $30,000 in fraudulent debt on her credit report. Her credit report was shot, and the trouble that it put her, and not just her, but her entire family, her husband, the children. It was a really difficult time, and it took us a while to get her through it. But ultimately, at the end, everything worked out real well.
Now, when you're talking about how identity theft can happen, a lot of ways people, as we discussed in previous videos, sometimes it's family. People think it can be data breaches and things of that nature. But actually, identity theft can be as simple as someone has a copy or has access to your personal identifying information. Now, in this instance, the hospital, the thief worked in the finance department. And think about it. When you go to the hospital, you have to check in and register. You give your name, your address, your date of birth, your social security number sometime. And they have access to all of the information. It's almost an identity theft toolkit. These finance departments and in doctors' offices and in hospitals. And that's exactly what happened in this case, isn't it, Hugo?
Yeah, as it turned out, and it was actually worse than that as we discovered when we got through it. The thief had actually admitted when she applied to the hospital that she had a felony on her record. So they put a known felon, a convicted felon in their finance department with access to all of the consumer's personal data, and she took care of it. She found somebody with a very similar last name. Their names were not very far apart. And next thing you know, she's off to the races, and she was buying all kinds of things. Do you remember what she did with all that stuff?
Well, I know she opened up personal finance charges and credit cards, and she bought things. As we said before, it's great to have the thief can go have a vacation on your dollar, but you have to have a mechanism in order to dispute inaccurate identity theft related accounts, right, Hugo?
Yeah. And once you do realize that you have a problem, you pretty much have taken care of the first step in an identity theft situation. So for this particular client, the first thing was to discover that she had all these fraudulent accounts on her credit report. So once she did that, she started to conduct a little bit of more investigation. And it didn't take her very long to figure out actually who did it, because the thief left fingerprints all over the place, with her name, her actual name, and the address on where she was sending all this fraudulent stuff. So then she went to step 2. Do you remember the step 2 in that process?
Well, step 2 is where you have to file a police report. Well, you don't have to file a police report, but in this instance, it made sense to file a police report because she knew the identity of the perpetrator, and the perpetrator was someone that was definitely needed to be brought to justice in the case. So part of filing the police report is getting the necessary background information in order to be able to do a credit dispute letter. So while we're discussing one specific case we had, the steps that an identity theft victim must take are similar, and was someone who went through the process in real time after that baby was born, right, Hugo?
Yeah, and this one was really unusual because most of the clients and consumers that we've had, they never figure out who it is, or even if they do figure out who it is, nothing's ever done. But in this particular case, the identity thief was apprehended. And once they did that, they went and found a storage locker. And in this storage locker was all of this commercial stuff that she'd bought with these fraudulent accounts, and it was full of just stolen or fraudulently obtained items. So you would figure that this was going to be a simple job, right? She had found the thief. She told the police who it was. The police made an arrest, and now we have an arrest in all of these accounts, and you would think it was going to come off. It should have been easy, right, Tom?
Well, just think about it. We tell people when they write a credit dispute letter to identify the account, describe the situation, and go ahead and be specific with your facts. And in this instance, what better facts could be more specific than this is the person who stole my identity. This is the accounts that they opened up. They were apprehended by the police and they found a storage locker with the items of information inside the locker. That should be cut and dry, and it should be one dispute letter and have it off your credit report. But unfortunately, that's not how it worked out, is it?
No. So she called the credit bureaus, she called Equifax, and she told them the story and told them what's going on. And all they told her was, well, this is up to you. You need to contact each of the creditors and notify them and tell them. So she takes 2 days off of work. She's a school teacher. She takes 2 days off of work. She starts calling all of these creditors and telling them that she's the victim of identity theft. And it worked for a lot of them. There was quite a few accounts, and a lot of them came off, but a couple of them didn't. And do you remember what happened to the city account?
Well, the city account stayed on, and in fact, they stopped the investigation because the office was being closed, is my recollection. So,
yeah. Ultimately, we discovered that in the case, too. So we deposed the process, and the processor said, yeah, I was working on it. But then somebody came into the building and said, all right, everybody get up and get out of here. And so he said he was working on her dispute, and he never had even time to process it because it was still on his desk, and he had to get up and leave. And for that reason, they didn't fix it, and Equifax wouldn't fix it. So what did she do next?
Well, she sent credit dispute letters as part of the process to get the identity restored. Now, if you think about it, as we've said before in other videos, they have an incentive to leave identity theft accounts on your credit file because they're not going to get paid by the thief. And in this instance, the thief is going to jail. So you're going to want to the creditor would like to keep the item on your credit report. So you have to provide as much information in that letter in order to try to prove your innocence and have the account removed from your credit file. Now, in this specific case, she sent the dispute letter and they corrected some of the information, but not all the information, right, Hugo?
No, and the stuff that she was not able to get off on her own by contacting the creditors directly, Equifax and Experian and TransUnion, they wouldn't take it off either. So there it sat. It sat on her credit report, and she was still unable to get anything done after multiple letters. So then ultimately she did what is arguably always going to be the next step, and that was that she had to hire a lawyer. She had tried on her own. She'd done everything she could. She'd caught the victim. She'd been arrested. She sent the letter. She'd made the phone calls. She did everything, but it still didn't come off. So then she had to hire us.
Right. Hiring a experienced credit report lawyer is going to help you in moving forward in your life and in being able to correct inaccurate items that are the result of identity theft. Because the way the system is set up, I believe I've heard judges describe it as Byzantine, meaning it's complicated and it's not something that makes sense. A lot of people think they can just dispute with the person who opened the identity theft account and deal with it that way. But the reality is you have to follow the law. You have to follow the Fair Credit Reporting Act and comply with the strict requirements of notifying the right people in the right order at the right time. And many times people just have to hire a lawyer in order to be able to navigate those requirements.
Well, the really good news about all of this that most consumers probably don't know is under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, there's a provision that allows for the shifting of the fees. It's called a fee shifting provision. And so if the consumer prevails in an identity theft case, for example, against the credit reporting agencies or one of the actual creditors themselves, then at the end of the case that they're entitled to recover their own attorney's fees. So it allows attorneys like us to take these cases on what's called a contingency fee or percentage fee basis. So we're not looking for money up front from the client, and they're not going to get a huge bill for a couple $100,000 when we get to the end of the case. That's a bill that we're going to send to the credit reporting agencies. So consumers do have the ability to retain a lawyer without taking all the risks that they might have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. Do you remember that some of the damages in this case, do you remember how bad they were in this particular case?
Well, the damages were significant. And I'll never forget when we did the trial of the case against Equifax, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom when the victim's husband was testifying about how he had left divorce papers on the stairs of a home for when the woman came back home from work. And it was just devastating. It was so sad. You could almost, I say you can hear time when it's that sad. And this is the significant amount of emotional distress that can destroy a family and make a person's life just unbearable with the result of the identity theft, right?
Yeah, I mean that's how it got to that point. But the couple were still, they were trying to do a lot with their credit, and they had applied, and they were trying to buy a vacation home, and her credit was so messed up because of all these accounts that the mortgage lender said this is the worst they'd ever seen, and so she wasn't able to be on the loan. And when she wasn't able to be on the loan, then they couldn't actually get it because they needed both of their incomes. It turns out they were both school teachers, and they couldn't afford that, and they needed to buy a car because their car was falling apart. And they went into the car dealership and they applied, and the car dealership said, look, I can't keep your wife on this. If you want to get financed, I got to take your wife off of it. And it was really bad. Do you remember what happened at the car dealership?
Right. It turned out, and this was effective testimony at the trial as well, is that a former student was actually near the finance department when they were trying to buy the car, and was surprised that their former teacher's credit was so poor she couldn't even buy a car. And that was just so embarrassing to think that at one point you were responsible for the education of someone, and now they're hearing you not being able to buy a car because of your credit, when the reality was it was an identity thief that destroyed your credit.
Yeah, and this was all part of the emotional distress that happened. And yeah, you're right. When we actually went to trial, some of the jurors were wiping away tears when they were talking about how impactful it was on their lives, and how close they got to divorce. I mean, they were right on the edge of separating with two very small children, and they thought that the only way that they were going to be able to go forward is to get divorced. But fortunately, that didn't happen, did it, Tom?
It didn't. Then didn't. They got back together and they got some traction. And I think part of it is just working through the process of the credit report case. Oftentimes when we represent someone, you're the victim to start, but once you start the process, you can start to feel like you're getting momentum, and you get a dispute letter out. Maybe one item comes off, or maybe you feel like you're making progress, and you can start to fight back. And then you have fighters like Hugo and I on your side that we will stick with you and restore your name and try to help you recover your damages that are available under the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
And the damages in this case were very significant. So ultimately, the case went to trial and went to a jury. And Equifax, we're talking about the Equifax, so she actually sued multiple defendants. But in the Equifax case, the jury came back and they found that she had $106,000 in economic damages, $245,000 in mental anguish and emotional distress. And then, as I said earlier, at the end of the case, we were entitled to apply for our legal fees. And ultimately, the court awarded an additional $181,000 in legal fees. But did Equifax pay the money right away?
No, unfortunately, they didn't. They appealed the case to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in order to try to, at the end of the day, you're nothing but a number to them. They want to lower the amount of money they pay, and they might give you a half-hearted apology. Oh, I'm so sorry you went through that. But the reality is, the bottom line is what credit reporting agencies and furnishers and banks are most concerned about. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, the ultimate thing we discovered is the credit reporting agencies are going to fight you tooth and nail. They hired some of the largest, most expensive law firms in the country, and consumers on their own just don't stand a chance. You've got to have somebody who's experienced and can do this. And then if you win, there's a good chance that they're going to appeal it to the Fourth Circuit or whatever circuit you live in. And now you got to go through the appellate process as well. And that's the other thing that we had to help them out with. But what was really shocking and disturbing is that on the appeal, the judges asked the lawyer for Equifax, well, if you don't think she's entitled to all this money, how much do you think she's entitled to? And they said, oh, well, for all that distress and everything we put her through, maybe $25,000. Remember that?
I do remember that. And I believe the quote that's in the published opinion says that they pulled it out of thin air, which was exactly what they want to do. They want to pull small numbers out of thin air in order to destroy your credit and not have to suffer the consequences and pay you your entitled financial compensation.
And ultimately what happened on appeal is the Fourth Circuit affirmed almost all of the damages from the legal fees, and she ultimately got paid. She went on to sue Experian, TransUnion, and Citi. and she was able to recover money from them as well. So ultimately, at the end of the day, she got her good name fixed, she got her credit fixed, and she was compensated for all of the distress and damage that these defendants had put her through. And fortunately, they're still married today. They're a wonderful couple, and we see them every once in a while. And they've stuck with us for a very long time, and ultimately turned out to be quite a good story.
It did. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. In other videos, you'll hear information about inaccurate Verizon accounts, how to deal with identity theft and inaccurate accounts generally, and automobile leases. In the meantime, take care of your credit and dispute any inaccuracies.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.